in the sun-baked stretches of the California desert, the U.S. Army maintains an immense, sprawling footprint. Across 36,000 acres of barren land, more than 26,000 armored vehicles sit parked in perfectly straight lines. When you first see these rows of steel baking in the heat, it is easy to assume you are looking at a massive graveyard, a final resting place for broken, obsolete machines left to rot. But these vehicles are fully intact and meticulously organized. This is an active, carefully managed stockpile, built on an instinct as old as warfare itself, storing exactly what you might need tomorrow to guarantee survival today. Ancient kingdoms like the Assyrians and Romans utilized this exact strategy, maintaining massive, centralized warehouses of spears, bows, and siege engines to quickly equip reinforcements and sustain their armies on long campaigns. By the Middle Ages, the scale expanded. Behind the heavily guarded stone walls of Venice's arsenal, the Republic built one of the world's most capable military logistics complexes, housing enough raw timber, armor, and gunpowder to construct and equip an entire naval fleet from scratch. Early American cities adopted this model directly, constructing imposing, fortress-like armories right on their cobblestone streets. These large civic buildings served as functional supply depots where local militias could immediately draw rifles and uniforms if a crisis broke out. Stockpiling weapons functions as the absolute bedrock of military logistics, ensuring a nation is never caught empty-handed when conflict arises. That logistical requirement grew exponentially during World War I, when armies replaced horse-drawn wagons with internal combustion engines. Thousands of motorized supply vehicles, like the heavy-duty Nash Quad, rolled off assembly lines to transport troops and gear across rough terrain. This chart shows the acceleration of U.S. military vehicle manufacturing during World War II. Between 1940 and 1945, American factories built 89,000 armored vehicles. To achieve this, civilian automobile production entirely collapsed. By 1941, civilian lines stopped, redirecting all resources toward military armor. The result was a stream of heavy hardware. Sprawling factory floors were packed shoulder to shoulder with freshly assembled M3 Lee tanks and self-propelled guns, entirely bypassing the old city armories to stage directly for the front lines. When the war ended, the massive industrial engine stopped. The United States suddenly held tens of thousands of operational combat machines with no immediate enemy to fight. With the Soviet Union consolidating power in Eastern Europe and the threat of another global conflict looming, planners needed a location large and remote enough to house this reserve, and a method to keep the metal ready to fight at a moment's notice. The solution was the Sierra Army Depot. Located 55 miles north of Reno in California's high desert, the site offered deep isolation from coastal threats, extensive rail connections for rapid transport, and critically, a bone-dry climate that severely inhibited rust. To guarantee these machines survived the harsh elements, crews developed a rigorous mothballing process. They drained engines of all fluids, applied heavy protective coatings to exposed metal, and thoroughly sealed the interiors to block out pests and sand. The depot's earliest occupants were machines like the M4 Sherman, which were rotated out of active duty and driven directly onto the desert flats for storage. The military classified this collection as a strategic reserve. If tensions with the Soviet Union boiled over into a physical war, these drained, sealed vehicles could be overhauled, refueled, and deployed to reinforce frontline units. Even without a direct war, the reserve proved highly functional. Mechanics routinely cannibalized these parked tanks for hard-to-find parts to keep newer active-duty fleets running, while hundreds of other refurbished vehicles were shipped overseas to equip allied nations under military aid programs. Through the peak decades of the Cold War, the Sierra Depot operated as America's shadow arsenal. Tens of thousands of armored machines sat perfectly still in the dry air, held in mechanical stasis. By the 1980s, the primary directive in the high desert pivoted. Rather than meticulously preserving every piece of equipment, crews were tasked with eliminating obsolete stockpiles. Under strict hazardous waste permits, teams hauled vast quantities of expired rockets, bombs, and artillery shells out to deep earthen pits, where they were detonated or ignited in massive open-air burns. The volume of destruction was immense. Year after year, the depot eradicated between 5 and 10 million pounds of explosive ordnance, creating towering plumes of smoke that were visible for miles across the Honey Lake Valley. In 1995 alone, crews destroyed roughly 56 million pounds of outdated munitions and hundreds of spent rocket motors, a drastic effort to clear heavily aged Cold War inventory from the military's ledgers. For nearly 20 years, the grounds functioned as an industrial-scale eraser for Cold War residue. The operations of the first Gulf War, and later the conflicts following September 11th, mandated another major pivot. Environmental restrictions ended daily open detonations, and waves of heavily used combat gear began flowing back from overseas directly to California. The depot became the military center for operational project stocks. Crews began staging deployable kits on pallets, including high-capacity petroleum pipelines, mobile water purification plants, and complete pop-up tent cities capable of housing hundreds of soldiers. They also began storing specialized industrial artifacts. By 2011, Sierra held more than 30,000 individual jigs, fixtures, and tools specifically designed to manufacture the F-22 Raptor stealth fighter, kept in deep storage in case assembly lines ever needed to be restarted. The facility's capabilities even went mobile. In 2022, a specialized team of depot mechanics traveled to the National Training Center, where they overhauled a struggling armor battalion's M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, swapping modules and replacing faulty fuel tanks to push the unit's operational readiness from 50% up to 80% right before a European deployment. Widening doors on surviving ammunition igloos and streamlining logistics converted the depot into a high-speed production line. The facility now focuses on rapidly regenerating equipment for active forces. Unlike decommissioned battleships fitted with bronze plaques or fighter jets displayed in museums, the 26,000 vehicles parked at Sierra do not carry their battle stories with them. The specific combat records of these individual machines have largely faded away. The original World War II artifacts have long since been scrapped, sold, or sent to memorials. The vast rows stretching across the desert are filled with modern variants and Cold War armor, kept here strictly for logistical utility rather than historical nostalgia. This collection reflects the military's evolving posture. When the Marine Corps enacted Force Design 2030 to restructure its combat units for naval operations in the Pacific, it divested its tank battalions, sending its last M1 Abrams directly to Sierra for long-term holding. Ultimately, the thousands of vehicles parked along these dusty aisles serve as a massive and undeniable strategic asset. This arsenal waits in the dry desert air, ready to be overhauled, fueled, and pushed back to the front lines.